there should be a mix of technologies to reach rural New Zealanders. We're talking here about the 13% of the population which isn't on the fibre network. Telcos aren't saying we want it to be wireless instead of fibre. They're actually saying fibre where fibre is appropriate, wireless where wireless is appropriate, which is a smart way of looking at it.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Greetings and welcome to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain, and great to have Bill Bennett, tech and telecommunications journalist, back in the studio. How are you, Bill?
I'm good, Paul.
Great to have you here. For those who maybe are new listeners and don't know where you fit in, a little overview, Bill.
Well, I've been writing about technology now for longer than a lot of you have been alive. And these days it's mainly about telecommunications and so on. I would quite happily write about enterprise, but there doesn't seem to be much coverage of enterprise these days. And you'll hear me on Radio New Zealand. You'll see me occasionally on TV. I sometimes write about business for the Herald. And I have my own website, which is under my name.
Yep, and we'll probably mention one or two things from your website during the episode. Well, let's jump in. Of course, big thank you to our show partners, Spark, One New Zealand, 2 Degrees, Workday, Fortinet and Gorilla Technology. Really appreciate their support of the local tech and innovation ecosystems and for keeping the New Zealand Tech Podcast running. Also, just a quick mention, New Zealand High Tech Gala Awards dinner is this Friday, so really looking forward to that. I believe it has sold out. Maybe there's a wait list.
Sold out, okay.
Yep, yeah. Okay, yep. But if you're there, please have a look on the list and come and say hi if you're feeling sociable and you haven't met me. I'll be there. But it's a very good event for sort of networking and meeting with people because there's a list and you can just look somebody's name up and find which table they're at, which is always helpful. Well, let's jump in. A lot going on locally as well as on the international front. So jumping into the local stories, yeah, it was a bit sad to hear about Mevo going into liquidation. Now, Mevo were really, I think, quite an exciting approach to minimizing or reducing the need to own a car or own as many cars through their car sharing offering, which I guess we've seen a number of these globally. And a handful of them here in New Zealand as well. But they looked like they were going to be an offering that was going to sort of stick around for a while. They did a crowdfunding campaign that finished up in February, and that was oversubscribed. I think it was certainly over their kind of base target, which I think the base target was sort of 2.2 million, and they raised 3.3. But then it was really a month later that they went into voluntary administration, March 1st, and then we just found out on Friday that they've been placed into liquidation, and creditors are owed $4.3 million. So yeah, really, 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 really sad to hear that, and especially for those that invested in the business, especially the crowdfunding campaign, because those campaigns are, it's a retail funding, and there'll be a whole bunch of folks who are not necessarily deep investment experts,
but mums and dads investors.
Yeah, they've gone in and chipped something in and thought this is a good thing for New Zealand. Mevo, of course, had lent pretty hard into electric vehicles with Tesla and BYD vehicles, which really, resonated for a lot of people. But ultimately that became part of their downfall because that really pressured things from a capital perspective. And their final, pivot was they were going to move to, much lower cost vehicles. And they recognised that they could, potentially spend half or less than what they were spending on lower cost cars, and for people just to be able to get around the place, that's often just fine.
I guess if they sell the cars off, they should be able to get a lot of that money back. It's not like, some businesses collapse and there's no assets to sell. But
well, I think they were under lease arrangements. Part of the challenge was that they got into difficulty with the provider and the owner of a lot of the vehicles. Their fleet was rapidly downsizing as well. And they had been asked to put in I think it was a $500K figure that was due, probably going back a few months now, and it wasn't very clear exactly what happened to that arrangement and whether they ultimately stepped up to that or not. So
I was going to ask you if it was the model of the company, but it sounds like it's the company, not the model.
It is an interesting one because these things haven't universally worked, internationally. And we are a smaller market in New Zealand as well. That doesn't necessarily help. But look, I think we can't just sort of sit back and let all the new business models and innovations happen in other parts of the world. It's good to see them happen here, but it's not always going to actually work out or be a fit for the New Zealand market. And
here's the thing, right? Uber was a success and has been a success purely because it had $50 billion worth of venture capital to burn through in the early stages. And that gave it a huge amount of scope for making mistakes in those first few years. And there was always a recovery. I guess if Mevo had $50 billion worth of venture capital to burn through, they'd still be around today.
Yeah. And look, I remember one of the companies that they touted. I went up to a Ford event in Silicon Valley, going back a good few years now, and I think Ford had partnered with this particular company. I'm trying to remember, was it called Get Around? Peer-to-peer car sharing, launched in 2011. So these things have, or maybe even earlier, been around for a fair number of years, and they certainly haven't haven't all worked out well. I mean, Uber, you could delve into the Uber story because there's some fascinating aspects to following the rules and legislation or not
following
in a lot of cases, and they're varying approaches, and of course they haven't been universally successful around the world, and I think China ended up being one of their most challenging markets, and now they've largely exited Asia. So, I think we need, or we should encourage new innovative companies to start up, and there's varying ways in which that will happen, and sometimes it's very much backed by traditional venture capital. Other times it's kind of inside, companies. Obviously, Spark with Spark Ventures, they've started up a bunch of things, and some of that has worked, and some of it hasn't, right?
Some still,
So there's always a risk with these things, but probably some lessons in there around. Your approach to investing in these sorts of things, it sounds like a bunch of people sort of burnt there in terms of that crowdfunding campaign with Mevo. And look, I hope what we ultimately hear is that they were completely sideswiped and that there was nothing untoward going on. But it does look a little odd that just a few short weeks after they closed that crowdfunding campaign, that they went into voluntary administration. On to next topic. We saw a report come out that was funded by our local telcos and our cell tower companies. So that's Spark, 1NZ, 2 Degrees, 40 South, and Connexa. Bill, you've written in detail about this on your blog at billbennett.co.nz, where you write you write a lot about telco. In fact, I think you were saying to me before the show that your blog at billbennett.co.nz now is purely telco, and other tech topics you're writing about on another site. But maybe you can run us through the highlights of this report and the lens at which you're sort of looking at the situation, which I guess effectively we're talking about a report that encourages future public funding into telecommunications to be much broader than, say, a focus on rolling out fibre to more of New Zealand's population.
Basically, it was, as I say, it was the local mobile industry collectively. Of course, the tower companies used to be part of those companies, the three main telcos. They paid for a UK-based analyst company to write their report. And the report, as you say, it basically says there should be a mix of technologies to reach rural New Zealanders. We're talking here about the 13% of the population which isn't on the fibre network.
Because that reaches 87% of
87% is on the fibre
population,
network.
Homes and businesses around New Zealand now, right?
Yeah, 87% is on the network.
Yeah. Originally, the target was it 80%?
The original target was 75, yeah.
75.
But the extension took it up to 87. And there's been a little bit of extra activity since then. And there's been some activity from some of the regional telcos as well, with they're building small fibre networks in what would be seen as rural areas, that were off the UFB map.
Smaller townships and so on. With
they wouldn't even amount to another 1% of the population, but they potentially they could, and they could go beyond that potentially. Well, look, the thing is that last year the Infrastructure Commission produced a report saying basically that connecting more of those rural New Zealanders was a priority, a strategic priority for the nation. And they're quite right. It absolutely is. And at the time, the discussion was that it can certainly go further than 87%. How much further is debatable. Chorus seems to think that they could get it up to about 95%. And beyond 95%, the economics of connecting fibre start to peter out. It starts to become, the cost of the extra distances involved and so on with fibre, because the cost of fibre tends to relate to the distances between connections.
Yeah, if you've got a whole lot of properties that are right next to each other, ideal what we're sort of seeing around our cities in recent years, where we're getting, what was one residential property now has, six or eight, homes on it. That's great bang for buck. From a rollout perspective.
And it's a matter of hundreds of dollars to connect those to the network. When you start to have a driveway which is, 100 metres plus, or in some of these rural cases, the driveways are way more than 100 metres. Then the expense starts to rack up, and generally speaking, either wireless or satellite is seen as a better technology to deliver. Now, the thing about that report from Flint is that the telcos aren't saying we want it to be wireless instead of fibre. They're actually saying fibre where fibre is appropriate, wireless where wireless is appropriate, which is a smart way of looking at it, because both are appropriate in their place and they're complementary. But also, those telcos are our biggest retailers of fibre. The overwhelming majority of customers who are on the fibre network, their subscriptions are with Spark or 2 Degrees or One New Zealand, and it works. The system works very well. But the thing is they make a lot more margin from people that have got wireless broadband than fibre broadband, because basically when you have fibre, you've got a wholesaler, and so someone else is clipping the ticket. Whereas when you've got a fixed wireless broadband connection, it's just one ticket, and so you get all the margin. So that's the economics of it. The elephant in the room that's not really covered very much in that report, it's mentioned, but it's not covered in any depth, is that there's a whole world of regional service providers.
The wireless internet
we
service
used to call them wireless, but they also
but WISPs, right?
But WISPs, but they're not even. And for a while there was a lot of sort of stringing poles along valleys and putting towers on hilltops in rural areas, and it was all about wireless internet, fixed wireless. But those companies,
Wi-Fi.
Generally those companies will sell you fibre if you've got fibre to your home.
That's it.
They'll sell other services. Some of them have got arrangements with satellite companies to sell satellite services too. So that they're more regional in their focus. It's the regional thing which is more important now than the technology, because as this report says, it's not so much about the technology; it's about getting everyone connected. And I think that they tend to be closer to their customers, and they tend to be more geared into the regional challenges than the. It's quite easy for someone sitting in a regional small town to bump into people in the local supermarket and get a picture of what's really going on. Whereas someone who's sitting in a nice corporate town in the middle of Auckland might not necessarily see that. So there's an argument for those. There's some arguments in favour of those rural service providers, and they do a very good job.
Yeah, I think it's been a really important part of the market, and I think it's always important to have competition. Obviously, the ability for a little small service provider to compete with a big national one will vary in terms of how much of the market that they can pick up, right?
Yeah,
they're not going to have a big budget to promote themselves.
Some of them can pretty much name all their customers as well. They're that small. But the other thing is that some of them have had some government funding over the years, particularly when there was some provincial growth fund money that was handed out during the Labour government, when Shane Jones was when New Zealand first were in a partnership with the government, and they handed out rural growth fund money, provincial growth fund money. But in general, the WISPs don't get much of a subsidy or don't get much government money. They're doing it on their own, so it's very much a sort of the sharp end of free enterprise in their world. And like I say, the report is. It's sensible. It's balanced. They say that in some cases fibre is the right technology, in other cases wireless isn't. And it's really a plea to share the money out if there is any money. But at the moment there isn't any government money being talked about for these projects at the moment, though that could change. But if there is money, then these telcos would like some of that, please. Thank you. The real question is can we get that last 13% connected? Well, the truth is most of that last 13% is connected one way or another, even if it's just Starlink. They have options, but there are better options, and Starlink's a bit there are some issues with Starlink. I mean, in the last few days, Starlink hiked its prices again. It'd been dropping its prices over the years to compete, and I think last week it just put its prices up again, which is probably because there's the IPO coming up, and it's got, it'll make the books look better if the prices are higher. But of course, the satellite thing will get competitive when Amazon comes online, which is possibly later this year. So there's lots going on in rural, but this is really a plea from the mobile companies to get a share of it. And the curious thing about it is that the mobile companies are very active in rural connectivity with the Rural Connectivity Group, because the Rural Connectivity Group, of course, is a joint venture between these three companies. So they could have gone into this project. They could have gone into this fibre, this challenging government strategy thing, with wearing their Rural Connectivity Group hat, but they didn't. They went in separately as the mobile providers, which tells you something about what they're playing with, what they're up to there.
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot to be said around the benefit we have as a country from having rolled out the fibre, the original ultra fast broadband initiative, and then there have been these varying projects, since the rural broadband initiative, RBI2, et cetera, et cetera. All of these things have helped give us coverage in New Zealand. And the satellite connectivity obviously is part of that mix, in addition to what's actually kind of, really happened locally. I was a little bit sort of surprised to see, this report, because I hadn't clicked that there was likely to be a lot of consideration given to rolling out more fibre to New Zealand. It seemed like we've kind of hit that sweet spot, but there was a bit of a push some months ago.
Yeah.
You were mentioning to me that was sort of suggesting that we should look at going further with fibre.
Well, and the other thing is that just about every other, well, no, not just about every other country in the world, because lots of countries haven't, but pretty much all the countries which we like to compare ourselves with have started to go further. So the European Union has a goal, I think, of getting everyone on fibre by 2030. Now, when they say everyone, they don't mean 100%, but they do mean something like 97, 98, 99% of Europe will have a fibre connection by 2030, and they look to be on track to getting there. I mean, we're not saying 100%, but we're saying very high 90s percentage coverage. That's country. I mean, obviously Singapore's a city, so it's a bit of an unusual. We shouldn't really be comparing ourselves to Singapore. I mean, connecting up, the Haas Pass is not the same as connecting up the deepest, furthest reaches of Singapore.
No. I mean, to get to 100% of Singapore, it's like getting 100% of non-rural, Auckland, right? And the apartment, most people are living in apartments, the very, very large majority of the population. So, but. Yeah, I was looking at some of the data online, and there's certainly some countries that have gone a chunk, further than, New Zealand. Spain was one that I saw. You mentioned that to me before the show.
Spain is talking about getting to, again, they say 100%, but they don't mean every single person. They mean 97, 98, 99% of the population will be in Spain, probably before 2030.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they do. I think that probably some interesting differences with Spain is that they've got a bigger landmass. New Zealand, roughly twice, I think, the landmass, but 10 times the population. So, I remember having driven through Spain. You're in one little village and you drive to the next. It's they're not very sort of spread out.
Oh, so, look, Paul, I grew up in the UK, which has a similar problem, right? Yeah. I would say that you'd be hard pressed to be anywhere in the UK and you're not 10 minutes drive from a pub. So that's true. But look, Spain does have some fairly remote places though, and they have some islands out in the Atlantic. There's parts of Spain, get into the Pyrenees.
Haven't looked at the Canaries and so on, what their fibre connections are like.
Yeah, well, get into places like the Pyrenees and so on. Yeah. There's some remote parts of Spain, and so it's not that different. I mean, it's closer to us than Singapore.
Yeah. Well, I just looked up Canary Islands. Apparently, fibre to the home coverage reaching nearly 93% of homes. So, it is fascinating to have a look into this.
So, if the Canary Islands can do it, why can't we?
Well, I think there are probably a range of differences. I mean, I think the approach of pick what's the right technology, in each case, rather than just go, well, let's do fibre. Look, personally, I think fibre is the gold standard. It's super reliable. It's awesome, but actually you do get fibre, outages. There is something to be said for making sure we've got other types of connectivity. And as you highlighted earlier, when homes are all stacked up close to each other, it's actually reasonably good value to get it out there. But when homes are long distances apart, long driveways, all those sort of things, it's probably never going to make too much sense economically.
It's not. I mean, and it would be. I mean, for example, there are farms where they're like 2 or 3 kilometres from the main road to get. Could be even more, and that's just not practical. But a farmer could dig a trench perhaps, but it's much easier for there to be a tower down in the the valley and just beam it up.
Well, 5G connectivity's got pretty good, right? As has satellite connectivity.
Well, like I say, there are issues there. But the other thing we should mention though is that those rural towers, the best ones, most of them, where it's possible, are actually connected by fibre anyway. So if you're building a fibre link out to a tower somewhere, then it's not a lot harder to build a fibre link from that tower to the neighbouring houses.
I'm not sure about that, Bill.
No, it's not.
I don't think they've structured it that way.
It's not always the case, but
in theory,
theory. And so what I'm saying is that realistically, we should be getting fibre up higher than 87%. We should be encouraging and helping the regional companies to build their fibre networks. That's a great initiative. if there is government money going into this, then some of that government money should be able to go to the mobile phone companies so that they can get fixed wireless broadband to places where that's the appropriate technology. It's basically everyone's a winner.
Good to hear your thoughts on that, Bill. We'll keep moving. One thing I did want to mention: our mobile networks actually in the past few months we have had a few outages, and we haven't really talked much about outages recently. But it sort of stood out and surprised me when I stepped back and thought about the outages that we've had recently, because our mobile networks and our connectivity through our New Zealand telcos has largely been very, very good in recent years, and they've been, I think, continuing to invest in how do we just tweak up that reliability a little bit further. And in fact, we had news through from Spark and their tower partner Connects on work that they're doing to upgrade cell towers at the moment with extended battery capacity supported by government funding, which is a positive thing to increase the resiliency. We know when we've had some major weather events over the last couple of years, the cellular networks have often stood up really, really well, but where there have been challenges, extra investment has gone into things like better generators, battery backup.
It's hard getting a generator to site if the bridge is out.
Oh, yes, yeah. But also link ups to satellite.
Yeah,
so if the fibre that connects the cell site is down, an ability then for that cell site to run off satellite to still deliver connectivity. So a lot of that stuff going on. But the outages, I just put together a short list. We had March 18th, 2 degrees, had a nationwide outage impacting parts of their network. That was resolved, within, I think, some hours. May the 1st, there was a reasonably large outage impacting One New Zealand and 2 degrees. And that led to some intermittent sort of issues across, parts of the network. I think lower North Island, sort of south there. It was 1NZ that I heard about when that happened, but it was mentioned that 2 degrees also had some impact there, not Spark on that one. We're recording this on the 19th of May. Yesterday, 1NZ had an outage. That disrupted mobile networks. And then just going online with Spark today to look up, I was just curious how they've been, and they mentioned they've got an outage impacting the Bulla district in terms of internet connectivity there that's been going on for, well, when I looked, it had been going on for a couple of hours or so. So, none of these things are 100% of the time, right?
Look, I think there's a couple of things to say in defence of the companies here. Is that the first one is that these outages which we've been seeing, they tend to be quite limited in their scope, so it's not affecting everyone. And the other thing is they tend to be very limited in terms of how long things are offline. So, I mean, if we go back a number of years, there were times when the networks were offline for longer and more people were affected. So there seemed to be more that we seem to have had a spate of incidents in the last few weeks, but none of them have been major or really troublesome. And so I think I feel it's largely under control, but it could just be pure statistical chance that there's been a few recently. It's like buses all coming at once and so on.
Well, the thing is, we know they're continually investing in these networks, right? They do not stop, and they've probably got the best data on their networks ever. When we hear about,
and they're much better at preempting
those sorts of things
as well. So it's quite common now for the systems to flag up a warning that this tower needs attention now because it's running, but it might not be, and so on. So that's good too. Yeah.
So even though we've seen more than we've probably traditionally seen in the last few weeks, I guess the expectation is that that'll sort of smooth off, and we're not likely to see that sort of activity on an ongoing basis. That's certainly what you'd hope.
The other thing I think that we haven't really talked about is that there's. I'm not going to say that there's been any sabotage with these outages. I don't think there have, but I don't think the tower saboteurs and that kind of nonsense. I don't think that's entirely gone away. I would imagine there's some of that still ongoing. I don't think there aren't many people out there now who still think that 5G gives you illnesses or whatever. But there's probably a few. It's not beyond the bounds of possibility that there's some of that still out there.
Also in the news locally was, this is an area I've been very curious about, is hydrogen-powered, hydrogen-fueled vehicles on the road. And we now see there's close to a dozen hydrogen-fueled trucks through a partnership of Haringa and TR Group. Now, this has been sort of reasonably, slow moving. We've been, certainly hearing about hydrogen, as a way of fueling vehicles for a long time. But it's good to see that there's some progress on that front, and it's happening in New Zealand. I think one of the challenges with hydrogen is storing it and distributing it and actually making that work in vehicles. And I think there was the classic case of someone in Christchurch that bought a new hydrogen-fueled vehicle, but wasn't able to actually refill their vehicle and actually use it because the infrastructure wasn't
exactly
there, right?
That's exactly what I was about to say. Is that the thing is it's all grand, but do we need an infrastructure for yet another technology where we have infrastructure for fossil fuels? We have infrastructure. It's beginning to develop in a meaningful way around the country for electric vehicles. A third set of infrastructure seems to be a lot of a big expense, which I'm not saying that it's not worth doing. I'm saying that we need to think about whether a third infrastructure is required. I would imagine that these people that are trialling hydrogen trucks have got that fixed. I mean, they've obviously got some way to make sure that their trucks don't run out of fuel. But if we're going to commit to that nationwide, well, maybe we should see what happens with electric cars first.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's a fair bit to probably delve into the pros and cons of this approach, and look, it's coming about in part because there has been government funding to support it, rather than it being something that's purely been a commercial endeavor. But this is part of trying new things and working out what's going to be the right fit, for New Zealand in the longer term. And
I think hydrogen's value is that it's a better option for getting a lot of power to a truck compared with the battery technology. I mean, if you need a truck which has got a lot of traction, you need quite big batteries, which is obviously adding to the weight of the truck, and it's circular. Whereas I think hydrogen is more efficient that way. But it's great that we're trying this stuff.
Yeah, and look, lot quicker, I believe, to refuel hydrogen vehicle than to charge up a big truck, because we don't have that sort of infrastructure in New Zealand at the moment. But that is a fast evolving space, and of course we know in China they've been demonstrating very fast charging of electric cars, and so as this technology evolves, give it a period of years, and the fleets will look quite different. Whether we've actually flipped over from a fossil fuel world of petrol and diesel to a range of electric type options, including the hydrogen fuel cell type trucks. I'm not sure how that plays out.
Well, but, I think when it comes to decarbonising transport, I think what we're seeing, up to a point, the likes of President Trump and Iran are making that decision for us. It's actually, if you hadn't been thinking about electric vehicles before, you certainly are thinking about them now.
Yeah, well, we've seen that in the prices for second-hand EVs in New Zealand and the sales going up of electric vehicles. All right, now on to, I guess, more international, more global topics. Fair bit going on. A couple I wanted to tap in on. Chrome silently installing a 4 gig local, locally based LLM on your computer, an AI large language model, without necessarily getting, an okay from users to, both to put that on your drive, but also for the AI to operate on your device. Do you see any issues with that, or is this just the nature of, look, software keeps upgrading, and this is part of the world we're in, that your local device is going to do some AI?
No, there's horrific issues with that, because you shouldn't need to upgrade your computer just because Google's decided to stuff Chrome, with extra features. It's actually an argument not to have Chrome, not to use Chrome. And it's a clear argument to that. The thing is that it is. I was looking at something a while ago, which sounds unrelated, but bear me out on this, right? When I back in the 90s, I was the editor of the Australian Net Guide over on the other side of the Tasman. And we looked at this. We had a story about how big web pages were getting. This is like in the late 90s. Yeah. And people were complaining that web pages were getting up to 30 kilobytes, right? And it was like, shocking. And would we be able to cope with, perhaps they could go to 100 kilobytes. Well, not so long ago, I looked at a newspaper website. I think I don't think it was the Herald. I think it was an overseas newspaper. But we were talking about 80 megabytes of page being downloaded. Wow. And it's, obviously this is sort of tech progress and this happens and so on. But generally, and here's the thing, right? When you get an 80 megabyte web page for a newspaper site, that's not the text that you're reading on the page. It's not even like perhaps it's the images and so on that goes. It's about advertising. It's about making money out of your reading their newspaper and so on. And of that, of those megabytes, probably 90% of that is about making money off you and so on. But the cost of that is okay. There's no real cost with downloading that much on a web page. Except that you may need to upgrade your computers to be able to read that web page. You need a more powerful machine,
connection, etc., etc.
Yeah, and you can't sort of recycle that 15-year-old computer that's in the basement just to read news anymore, because it doesn't work, because it can't cope with pages that size. And that's something like that going on here, where they're just pushing more and more of this processing out to us on the edge of the network. And you've heard all the stories about, data centers requiring power and water and so on. Well, pretty soon your home data center is going to require power and water so that Google can run its AI.
I guess engine. when you think about, Chrome will be on, however many billion devices.
It's probably on more than half.
And so, if that's getting pushed out everywhere, and then that's impacting your power draw, your CPU, GPU, NPU loads, even
if it's only a tiny amount per person, it's a billion people with a tiny amount. Soon adds up to something. So, but also it's the arrogance of them to just dump that stuff on you, which is an incredibly arrogant act. It would help if they said, "Would you like to download this 4 gig large language model?" How many people would choose to do so if it was an optional thing?
Well, this is interesting because everything seems to have an AI element to it. So if you get an iPhone update, you've got Windows 11, etc. This is kind of what we're dealing with, and I guess there's a level to which it just gets normalized. But the question is, do the benefits outweigh the downsides in every case? And should we as society be always having the latest technology sort of, pushed upon us, or should we actually be able to make that choice and say, actually, I don't want this?
Well, and you say should the benefits, but whose benefits? Because the benefits are not necessarily. It's like when you have a web page with 80 megabytes of data, which is mainly about advertising. It's not you, the reader, who's benefiting from that. It's absolutely not Paul Spain benefiting from that. It's Coca-Cola or whoever's trying to sell stuff to him that's benefiting from it. And it's the same thing with this. It's not you who benefits from having that piece of code on your machine. And do you remember years ago that you could load up your screen so that when your screensaver was on, it would do work for SETI, for searching for extraterrestrial life, or
that's right,
or
that's
whatever.
Right. Yeah, you were choosing to give away some of your processing power, your computing power, for that cause.
I mean, I'm sure people would happily do that, but do you really want to have Google's AI on your browser? Well, I like I say, when Apple gave people the ability to choose whether they would have privacy invasion from things like Facebook apps and so on, overwhelming majority of people chose not to have it. So I think if you were given the choice, you would choose not to have this. The problem is that they're all at it.
Yeah. Well, that takes us on to Google's Chromebook successor, the Google Book,
which I would imagine probably also loads a large language model.
Well, this is the interesting thing. It's being referred to as an AI native laptop. It combines the capabilities of Android and Chrome OS, which we're used to from Chromebooks, but built very much around Gemini, which is their AI model. And I saw it noted there's sort of the move aims to redefine computing with intelligence at the core, positioning a Google Book as a premium successor to Chromebooks and a strategic response to competing ecosystems, which might just be the MacBook Neo, because you're coming in at somewhat similar price points, but it's very much around creating a device where AI is operating all the time.
Well, okay. At this point, if we were doing this live in front of an audience, I'd ask the audience now: how many of you have got Chromebook? Right? How many hands do you think would go up, Paul?
Not many.
Not many. No. Chromebooks are huge in American schools. Yeah. They're huge. They're huge in some niche markets, but they've
fair few in New Zealand schools.
There are some in schools here as well, but. I don't think there are very few people who choose to buy a Chromebook, right? So I think there's going to be very few people who choose to buy a Google Book, and there'll be some, but there won't be very many. And again, I think they're probably look. You can't buy a laptop today without AI being somewhere in there. You can't buy a smartphone. You can go and buy a dumb phone, and in fact. Increasing numbers of people apparently are buying dumb phones to get away from all this. But it does seem to be there are times when you get the impression that AI is being rammed down your throat. It's not necessarily, I mean, there are benefits, yeah, sure, there's some good things to it. But it does seem to me that we don't have much choice in this. We're going to have it whether we want it or not, like it or not. And
it's interesting you say that, because we've been reading, and TechCrunch have got an article on this about an AI backlash at university graduation speeches in the US.
Yeah,
where speeches that are referencing artificial intelligence in some cases are facing huge backlashes, and folks being booed by the graduating students when AI gets a mention. And look, sometimes there might be some other reasons why that particular person is getting booed, but it does seem to be there's quite a connection with references to AI. And look, you can understand it from a student's perspective. If you've spent years going through the university system, you're about to graduate, and then somebody's touting to you AI, and you're out there trying to get a job, and you realise that a lot of the entry-level positions, the companies that had those entry-level positions previously, deciding actually AI can do the entry-level work, and that in some cases it's going to be actually pretty hard to get into the workforce.
Yeah, and if you don't have entry-level jobs, you don't have people growing up to do the next level jobs or the top level jobs. So yeah, it's an issue. Look, I think that we only just starting to scratch the surface of the AI backlash. And I think it will. I think it will possibly become a political issue. I don't think it's going to be a political issue at our coming election. Although I did hear the finance minister this morning talking about getting rid of public servants, and maybe we could replace them with AI. And I was thinking, okay, well, maybe we will see more of a backlash here sooner rather than later about AI. But like it or not, there is a backlash of sorts coming one way or another. There will be a backlash. I don't think we're going to end up in one of those sort of science fiction scenarios like June, where they got rid of all. I think they got rid of all computers, didn't they, in June?
Aren't we already living in some science fiction
yeah,
scenario?
I think we are. It was some dystopian science fiction scenario. Yeah. But anyway, the thing is that I don't think we're going to go that far, but I do think that there will be a backlash. And I think that we're only just seeing the first rumblings of that. You heard it here, folks, first.
Yeah. Yeah, no, we're certainly in interesting times with some of these sorts of topics. I guess Apple have done varying things to differentiate themselves by leaning a little bit more into privacy than say Google, and that certainly has helped build confidence in Apple for some. But I saw that they're looking to auto delete AI type chats with Siri. And so an option that set it to say 30 days old, that will just auto delete. So you're not kind of letting the AI, the large language models, tap into all of your data from all of history. Now, there'll be the options there, I believe, to sort of 30 days, a year, or forever. So you can give it that enduring access, but it is designed, I would think, to give people just a little bit more comfort that they're not taking or storing all your data.
Siri's AI capabilities is pretty much rubbish. And it's fair. I think it's fair to say that it's not fated as something which is wonderful. And I would imagine that amongst Apple users, Siri AI is just about as popular as Chromebooks. I think it's not a huge thing, but I think Apple could be doing something to correct that by doing these things. For sure, that's an interesting approach, but.
Interestingly, Apple and Google have partnered. So now we're at a time where Apple are differentiating themselves on privacy, but actually in the back end, will more and more be leveraging Google's technology, but in theory, in a manner that gives people more confidence from a privacy perspective. So I guess we'll see how that kind of plays out.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that it certainly looks on the surface as though Apple missed the AI bus, but it could be that their bus is not the bus that people think it was. I mean, I saw a piece today in one of the financial papers overseas saying that the profitability of AI companies the projections of profitability of AI companies has been pushed back further. So, maybe they dodged a bullet rather than missed the bus.
Yeah. And we haven't even put any time aside to talk about the Elon Musk versus OpenAI and Sam Altman there, but I'm not sure there's actually a whole lot to cover on that one. It looks like it's kind of been a technicality that one has not really come to much. Lastly, we're used to new computer processors sort of coming through on an annual cycle, usually from Intel, AMD, and others with their new processors coming through. It's a normal part of new release from Samsung, such as the newish this year's S26 release. Apple with their new phones and their laptops. And all of the laptop manufacturers each year, they tend to be rolling out the new chips. Today, we've seen the announcements sort of start flowing in from various companies such as HP, who are obviously partner with Intel because they've got Intel chips inside a large percentage of their machines. And today, their Core Ultra Series 3 processors are announced inside a whole range of devices. So
Panther Lake
is the code name for it, isn't it? So those will be coming through. If you're thinking, if you're in a business and you think, when am I going to get my new Panther Lake or Core Ultra 3 laptop? Usually what we see is the first models will come through in consumer devices, the enterprise or business class devices. They usually take a little bit longer to sort of cycle through, but certainly we will be seeing those in the market, over the next little while, but probably the consumer ones virtually immediately, very very soon, and then the those business class devices. Look, good to see this happening. I think some of the stats and the numbers that we see, and this is not just Intel, it's kind of most of the vendors, they tend to tout some incredible performance increases, 70% for this, 60% for that, huge improvements in battery life. But you do have to dig into the detail. And in most cases, if you look quite closely, if you're going from the equivalent top last year's generation to this year, we're not seeing massive leaps overall, but it's still really helpful.
Well, two things, right? First is that Intel's moved to a new technology base with this, which is, in that sense, it's like when Apple first got moved to Apple Silicon. It's a new technology base for the company. The second thing is that it's not that long since people started talking about Intel's obituary, is it? People are starting to write the company off and talk about it not surviving. And I don't think things are that much better now. I think they are better, but I don't think they're hugely better. I wouldn't say this is the last roll of the dice for Intel, but it's an awful lot resting on this. Having said that, I've been looking at some recent HP laptops, and they're really, really nice. I'm quite impressed.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been using a EliteBook, and they're making good quality kit now. The standard has certainly kept moving up. I think the latest Apple MacBooks performing pretty well, and we're seeing the same from sort of HP and Lenovo and so on. Microsoft have sort of still got that a bit of the market share in New Zealand and around the world with their Surface laptops and the Surface Pros. Still seems to be reliability issues though with the Microsoft product.
The strange thing about Surface, and my word, we weren't talking about this before we came on the show at all, but I see Surfaces everywhere when I go out to places to work and so on. But their numbers, if you look at the stats of what's selling, then they're not huge. So I can only conclude that Surfaces are like really big with the tech community, and not big and not at all big out there in the wild with everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, I have one of the more Qualcomm-based Surface laptops, and look, it's a laptop that generally, I get there's some occasional oddities with it, but generally performs well. It's got great battery life. Better than the Intel laptop, but the Intel ones, just keep getting better as with AMD.
But there's one thing about Intel, which I think is always going to hurt, and that is they still haven't got a fanless processor. They don't have. I recently bought M4 MacBook Air, and it's silent. I recently looked at a very nice Omnibook from HP, and it was great, but it was humming.
Yeah,
and that's quite a difference.
Yeah, I mean, my impression is that there will be fanless options, available with these Series 3 processors. What we've seen in the past is, it's often been hard to deliver a fast laptop
Yeah.
if you don't have that kind of active cooling. If you go with passive cooling and fanless, then you've tended to end up with a much slower device,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, and that's certainly where the ARM-based processors have been have been really good, because they just haven't used so much power, haven't heated up so much. So yeah. But I think that's us for this week, Bill. It's been great to catch up. Great to have your insights on the New Zealand Tech Podcast again.
Well, thanks, Paul.
Now, where should folks be looking for your content? Because as well as billbennett.co.nz for the telco content, there's the microblog site that you've got as well.
It's there as Bill Bennett's Reporter's Notebook, and it's where I put everything that's not telco.
Right. So that's billbennett.micro.blog at the moment, was I think when I looked for it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you have
But
to.
you can Google it.
Yeah, you can Google it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I still haven't finished. I haven't finished moving everything across yet. So buying a domain is the next job, I think.
Yeah. Oh, very, very good. Well, thanks again, Bill. Thanks everyone for listening in, and of course a big thank you to our show partners, Fortinet, Workday, One New Zealand, 2 Degrees Spark, and Gorilla Technology. Really appreciate their support for the show, and we will be back again with more content, some really interesting interviews as well across on the New Zealand Business Podcast, and there tends to be a number of sort of tech related interviews coming up on the New Zealand Business Podcast, so that one's worth looking out for if you haven't caught up on our latest episodes across there also. Otherwise, haere rā, and we will see you again next week for the next show. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Bill.